The room was electric, charged with the kind of tension that only politics can create. Cameras blinked like unblinking eyes. Reporters whispered predictions. And somewhere in the gallery, a phone began streaming live. Pam Bondi sat forward, the mic catching the soft tap of her ring against the table. For a heartbeat, the nation waited for her signature sting, the sharp retort that always drew headlines. But instead, her voice broke through with disarming calm. "You know," she began, almost quietly, "I may not always agree with her politics, but Jasmine Crockett's wisdom today, it stopped me in my tracks." A ripple of stillness passed through the room. The usual chatter died. Even a sound tech froze. For once, the noise of Washington bowed to silence. Within seconds, the outside world erupted, tweets firing like fireworks, timelines lighting up with disbelief. Hashtag Bondi credits Crockett blazed across screens, the clips spreading faster than pundits could process. And as millions replayed those words, the meaning sank in deeper than the moment itself. In an era addicted to outrage, a single act of grace had cut through the noise and changed the tone of the nation. But how did two rivals, once divided by ideology, arrive at this moment of mutual grace? The week before that viral moment, America was already on edge. Every screen flashed the same headline: another hearing, another showdown. Politics had become theater, outrage the new national language. Across talk shows and timelines, the noise was relentless. One side roaring for dominance, the other bracing for defense. The line between public service and performance had blurred into spectacle. Then came the announcement: a high-profile congressional hearing on ethics reform. Pam Bondi and Jasmine Crockett were both on the list. Within hours, media banners lit up with anticipation. Crockett versus Bondi, round 2. Commentators smirked, audiences grabbed popcorn. Conflict was expected, almost required. The last time these two faced each other, sparks had flown. Producers clipped their exchanges into viral soundbites. Hashtags turned passion into profit. But this time, something else was brewing, something neither pundits nor politicians predicted. Behind the staged outrage, ordinary people were exhausted. They didn't want another shouting match. They wanted a reason to believe that decency could still survive the spotlight. They craved hope, but had forgotten what it looked like. As the hearing date approached, the online chatter swelled. Clips from past clashes resurfaced, edited like trailers for a grudge match. Comment sections flooded with cynicism. Same show, different day. Yet under the noise, a quieter current moved through the country, a yearning for something real. And when the cameras rolled that morning, the air felt thick, as if the whole nation were holding its breath. People didn't know what they wanted more, a fight or a miracle, but they were watching, waiting, scrolling, ready. Because deep down, even in the chaos, Americans still believe that somewhere between the outrage and the silence, truth might speak again. To understand the weight of this moment, we must look at who Pam Bondi was before the silence. Before the change, Pam Bondi's career had been built on conviction, the kind that didn't tremble, didn't blink, didn't apologize. From her early days as a Florida prosecutor to her tenure as state attorney general, she earned her name through sharp questioning and flawless composure. She was polished, camera-ready, the kind of figure who could dismantle an argument without breaking eye contact. Her supporters called her fearless. Her critics called her ruthless. Both were right in their own way. She understood television like most people understood daylight, instinctively. Every lens was a battlefield, every soundbite a weapon. When the red light went on, she knew exactly how to hold her shoulders, how to pause just long enough for the clip to trend. On Fox News panels, she became a fixture, confident, deliberate, unyielding. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. She didn't just debate, she performed belief. And in a world addicted to certainty, she became its mirror. "I fight hard because I believe hard," she once told an interviewer. It wasn't arrogance, it was armor. Years of public scrutiny had taught her that vulnerability was misread as weakness, that admitting doubt was handing your opponent the pen to write your story. So she never flinched. Not when challenged, not when criticized, not even when cornered. But somewhere behind the polished smile, the fight had begun to feel heavier. The thrill of the verbal duel dulled under the weight of repetition. The same questions, the same outrage, the same headlines. Nights grew quieter, reflections longer. In the stillness of her home office, the framed accolades didn't speak back. The television glow that once fueled her pride now reflected tired eyes. She wasn't blind to the caricature she'd become, the firebrand, the attack dog, the partisan warrior. Every label was both a weapon and a wound. Yet she couldn't stop playing the part. The world expected it. Politics wasn't just about belief anymore. It was about brand survival. She defended what she thought was right, fought battles she believed mattered. But lately, she wondered whether all the shouting had blurred the substance underneath. There were moments, rare, fleeting, when she caught herself yearning for something quieter, more grounded. Not surrender, but peace. Still, she pushed forward. On the morning of the ethics hearing, she rehearsed her talking points like choreography. Facts, figures, rebuttals, ready. The cameras would roll, the country would watch, and she'd do what she always did, stand her ground. Yet, something inside her felt unsettled, a whisper she couldn't name. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe it was the strange clarity that comes after years of living in noise. She straightened her notes, smoothed her jacket, and reminded herself who she was. Pam Bondi, the unflinching voice of conviction. What she didn't know was that the moment she'd built her entire career preparing for would unfold differently than any before. Not because of a debate she'd win, but because of a woman sitting across from her, calm, steady, and unbothered by the storm. Because on the other side of that table sat a woman whose quiet resolve had been forged in fire. Jasmine Crockett's story began far from marble halls and flashing cameras. It started in the sunburned neighborhoods of South Dallas, where faith and grit were not ideals. They were survival tools. Her mother worked double shifts. Her father fixed cars and sometimes dreams. Money was scarce, but dignity wasn't. Every Sunday, her grandmother would remind her, "Baby, speak the truth, even if your voice shakes." Those words would become her compass. As a child, she didn't have much, but she had questions. Why were some schools falling apart while others gleamed? Why did justice seem to depend on your zip code? Teachers called her bold. Classmates called her stubborn. But Jasmine wasn't stubborn. She was awake. She learned early that silence protected no one. Law school was a battlefield of a different kind. She studied between shifts, her notes scribbled on takeout napkins. Some nights, she'd stare at her reflection in the library window and whisper, "Keep going." Every rejection letter, every patronizing smirk from professors who underestimated her, sharpened her resolve. When she passed the bar, she didn't chase prestige. She walked straight into public defense, where justice was least convenient. Her first cases weren't glamorous. They were the forgotten ones, teenagers without representation, mothers framed by circumstance, fathers crushed under unfair systems. She listened, truly listened, to stories others didn't want to hear. And when she spoke in court, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. The courtroom, once a place of intimidation, became a stage for her calm precision. But with each small victory came new scars. Late nights reviewing files blurred into mornings filled with exhaustion. There were moments of doubt, times when she wondered if one woman could really move the weight of an unjust system. Yet each time despair crept close, she remembered her grandmother's words. Every time someone called her too direct, she learned to turn pain into poise. Every dismissal became discipline. Every condescending smile became fuel. She carried herself like a storm waiting for the right horizon, controlled, deliberate, unyielding. Her leap into Congress wasn't ambition, it was duty. She didn't arrive with an entourage or slogans. She arrived with receipts, policy drafts, and a quiet vow to never let chaos drown out clarity. And soon, her composure became her weapon. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She listened, processed, and when she spoke, the room stilled. Her calm wasn't weakness, it was power refined. By the time the ethics hearing came, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another voice in the room. She was a reminder of what leadership could still sound like. The world expected confrontation. She intended elevation. And in that hearing, with cameras rolling, her calm would meet Bondi's fire, but only one would change the tone of the nation. The hearing room buzzed like an electrical current. Cameras whirred, pens hovered, and every seat was filled with the quiet hunger of an audience waiting for drama. Pam Bondi leaned forward, her tone sharp, her posture flawless, a seasoned performer stepping into familiar light. She opened with confidence, each word clipped and deliberate, striking like polished steel. With all due respect, Congresswoman, idealism doesn't clean up corruption. Accountability does. The crowd stirred. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. Her pen rested between her fingers, motionless. Not even a blink betrayed emotion. She let Bondi's words hang, like a storm cloud waiting to break. Bondi pressed on, her voice rising, fueled by momentum and the invisible pulse of cameras. She knew this rhythm, the clash, the cut, the viral moment. We've heard speeches, she continued, but where are the results? Where's the realism? Still, Crockett said nothing. Her silence became its own gravity, drawing the room tighter around her calm. The narrator's voice cut through the tension. Every word from Bondi was a challenge. Every pause from Crockett was a statement. The air grew thick. Even the clicking cameras slowed, uncertain whether to capture confrontation or revelation. Bondi leaned in further, her voice now a blend of confidence and something else, unease. Maybe passion isn't enough, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. Maybe it's time for experience to lead. The comment landed heavy. Reporters glanced up. This was it. The cue, the spark, the line destined for headlines. The crowd braced for Crockett's rebuttal, the signature sting, the viral soundbite. But she didn't give them that. Instead, Jasmine Crockett lifted her gaze, her expression soft yet unshaken. The silence stretched so long it became uncomfortable, commanding attention in a way shouting never could. And then, in a voice low but unwavering, she spoke, not to win the moment, but to redefine it. Jasmine Crockett took a breath, unhurried, deliberate, the kind of breath that comes before truth, not triumph. Her tone was soft, but her words carried a clarity that sliced through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. I understand your concern, Ms. Bondi, she began, steady and unshaken. You want accountability. So do I. But accountability isn't about punishment. It's about progress. It's about making sure we don't repeat the same mistakes while pretending they're victories. The room stilled. The shift was almost physical, a quiet hum replacing the earlier static of confrontation. Crockett's composure wasn't weakness. It was control. I grew up watching people who worked twice as hard just to be told they were asking for too much, she continued. So, when I speak about reform, I'm not defending failure. I'm defending fairness. Because the people who trust us deserve more than a headline. They deserve hope that works. Bondi's eyes narrowed, not in hostility, but in focus. The rhythm of the exchange had changed, and she could feel it. Crockett didn't push harder. She didn't need to. Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had already lived the fight. The goal isn't to win, she said, her gaze steady on Bondi's. It's to move forward together. Wisdom isn't about being right. It's about being fair. The words hung in the air, unflinching, undeniable. A soft murmur spread across the room. Journalists lowered their phones for a moment, forgetting to record. Staffers glanced at each other, recognizing the shift. This wasn't performance. It was perspective. Crockett leaned slightly forward, her tone lowering even more, as if speaking to something deeper than politics. You and I both know this. Every time we trade empathy for ego, the country loses. Every time we talk over each other instead of through each other, someone at home gives up believing we'll ever listen. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just looked at her colleague, the way one looks at someone who might finally be ready to listen. Then, Bondi leaned toward the mic, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. That's wisdom, she said quietly. and I respect that. A single heartbeat of silence. Then another. And then the sound. Applause. Hesitant at first, then swelling, breaking through the room like a wave that couldn't be stopped. The crowd wasn't cheering victory. They were honoring grace. Even those who had come for confrontation found themselves standing. Not because someone won, but because for a fleeting moment, decency had. Bondi gave a small nod, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't defiance either. Crockett returned the nod, not in triumph, but acknowledgement. The narrator's voice carried over the applause. It wasn't defeat. It was recognition. Cameras flashed. Phones rose again. Tweets began flooding timelines before the hearing even adjourned. Hashtag Bondi credits Crockett. Hashtag wisdom over war. Hashtag respect still exists. Each clip replayed the same moment. Bondi's unexpected humility, Crockett's calm, and the silence that spoke louder than shouting ever could. Reporters called it the hearing that healed a headline. Commentators dubbed it the viral act of grace. And as the applause finally subsided, one truth became clear. This wasn't about left or right, victory or loss. It was about something rarer in modern politics. Humanity breaking through the noise. But the moment didn't stay in that room. It ignited a wave across the country. It started within minutes. One clip, a 15-second exchange between Pam Bondi and Jasmine Crockett, began to spread like wildfire. No shouting, no insults, no sou warfare. Just a moment of grace. Hashtag wisdom wins. Hashtag Crockett and Bondi. Hashtag respect goes viral. By the next morning, those three hashtags dominated every feed from Washington to Wichita. TikTok edits looped the same few seconds. Bondi saying, "That's wisdom, and I respect that," followed by Crockett's quiet nod. YouTube creators cut reaction videos. Commentators replayed the moment with disbelief in their voices. CNN called it the unexpected truce. The New York Times headlined, "Respect goes viral." Even Fox News, uncharacteristically, described it as a reminder of what political courage looks like. Faith leaders tweeted verses about humility. Journalists applauded sincerity. One viral post read, "For once, I cried watching politics because I saw hope." Bondi appeared on a morning show days later, measured and reflective. "I've spent a career fighting hard," she said. "But that day reminded me that listening, really listening, can be stronger than any argument." Crockett, in a separate interview, responded with her trademark calm. "It meant a lot," she said simply. "Not because I was agreed with, but because respect was given. And maybe that's how healing starts, one conversation at a time." Clips of her statement became instant reaction fodder. Commenters wrote things like, "This is the energy we need in America," and finally, "leadership that feels human again." Late-night hosts turned the exchange into a symbol. One joked, "In 2025, two politicians actually agreed. Scientists are still studying the phenomenon." The audience laughed, but beneath it was admiration. The country had grown so accustomed to division that unity felt revolutionary. The narrator's voice broke through the montage. In a season of noise, silence carried more power than shouting ever could. From classrooms to community centers, the clip became a teaching tool. Professors used it in civics lessons about dignity in discourse. Church leaders cited it in sermons about humility. Parents shared it with their children, saying, "See, that's how grown-ups should disagree." It was no longer just about Bondi or Crockett. It was about the idea that respect could still trend, that decency could still break the algorithm. The emotional tide crested when an elderly viewer, in a viral Facebook post, wrote, "I've watched politics my whole life. This is the first time in decades I felt proud." The story had begun as a clash and ended as a collective sigh of relief. Proof that America still had room for grace. But for Jasmine Crockett, the moment wasn't about praise. It was about purpose. When the cameras turned back to Jasmine Crockett days later, she didn't bask in the attention. She didn't call it victory. Sitting across from a reporter in a quiet studio, she spoke with the same calm that had carried her through the hearing. "We can disagree and still respect," she said softly. That's not weakness, that's leadership. Her words weren't scripted. They carried the weight of someone who had seen too much division to mistake noise for strength. The interviewer paused, visibly moved, before asking what she hoped people took away from that day. Crockett smiled, not triumphant but reflective. That wisdom isn't about being louder, she said. It's about being clear. It's about knowing when to listen and when to let grace do the talking. The moment replayed across millions of screens again, not for outrage this time, but for calm. The narrator's voice returned, gentle and resolute. In a time when ego is mistaken for conviction, humility becomes a revolution. When anger is rewarded, restraint becomes courage. Sometimes the most. Radical act in politics is to stay kind. Cut to a split frame. Two women, once on opposite sides of the ideological battlefield, now bound by a shared moment of humanity. Pam Bondi, once the emblem of partisanship, acknowledging wisdom. Jasmine Crockett, the young congresswoman who turned confrontation into communion. Commentators called it symbolic. Two Americas meeting halfway across a table. But to many, it felt personal. A reminder that respect doesn't require surrender, and empathy doesn't erase conviction. Across social media, the tone had shifted. Fewer insults, more reflection. People wrote about calling old friends they hadn't spoken to since the last election. About remembering that decency, even when rare, still resonates. Crockett's final words in the interview lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. We don't have to shout to be heard. We just have to mean what we say, and care who we say it to. The music swelled, soft strings rising, carrying the message beyond the screen. The narrator closed the circle, because in the end, dignity isn't partisan, it's human. The image faded, two silhouettes leaving the hearing room, the sound of applause still echoing faintly. What began as a clash had transformed into a lesson, one that transcended politics and reminded the nation of something deeper. The power of listening, the grace of restraint, and the rare courage it takes to stay kind in an unkind world. And that's why millions shared it, not as politics, but as possibility. Pam Bondi credited Jasmine Crockett's wisdom, but in doing so, she reminded us all what respect sounds like. One moment of grace cut through years of noise and reminded the nation that listening is still power. If you believe leadership begins with listening, share this moment. Subscribe, and stand with the movement proving that calm isn't weakness, it's strength. Because in a divided world, dignity still wins. And every time we choose respect over rage, we bring that world a little closer. This isn't just a story about politics. It's a story about us.